Hey, everybody. Peter Valley here again. So we have today Stephen Smotherman, who is the author of the Reseller's Guide to Board Games, and he is also the man behind Full-Time FBA, which is an awesome blog everyone should check out. And so the reason we're having Stephen on is to talk about the concept of blind spots. And I think so. Last week I gave a case study in a very sort of general look at somebody that took a lot of blind spots and put them in together to rebound from some competition that she was experiencing. And so that was a sort of a general look. And today we're going to talk to Stephen, who's going to give us a more specific look at a very specific blind spot, and that is board games. And so just to kind of give one of the chapters away in my book that's coming out, Blind Spot Profits, on Sunday night, one of the blind spots is on board games. And I just give a real concise synopsis of sourcing board games. If you really want the full story, you got to get Stephen's book. So that's why I want to have Stephen on today, because I think board games are one of the kind of the coolest and most overlooked blind spots amongst Amazon sellers that source in the secondhand market. And I can tell you, and Stephen, I think I told you this, like I would just look at board games for years, and I would think, when I was trying to think of like, what is it that I'm missing? What is it that's right under my nose that I'm not seeing? I knew that board games was one of those things, and they're everywhere, and I would scan them, and they're worth money, a huge percentage at the time. But the missing pieces, so to speak, were like, how do I make sure all the pieces are there? And there was just a lot to the equation that I could never figure out on my own. So that's what your book did for me, is it filled in all those gaps. So let's get into it. Let's talk about, first of all, just kind of who you are, what type of Amazon seller you are in terms of your inventory, and just kind of give us a roundup.
Yeah, well, like you said, my name's Stephen Smotherman. I blog over at fulltimefba.com. And I kind of started the blog because I kept seeing so many Facebook questions asking, different questions about stuff. And, I enjoyed filling out the answers and trying to help people. And some of the stuff was like really long answers. And I thought, man, a lot of people need to see this. So I put a blog together to kind of just help people be better FBA sellers. It's always frustrating when you've got other FBA sellers out there who are doing things wrong and doing things that are not profitable and making it worse for everybody. So I just kind of want to help everybody. And I've been selling on Amazon for full time for about 4 years. Before that, I did eBay as kind of a hobby for about a decade, and made real good money with eBay. But Amazon has really kicked things up a notch. I'm able to support myself and my 4 kids and my wife.
That's awesome. That's a familiar story, that people transitioning from eBay to Amazon, specifically FBA, and just finding that things just really take off for them. So talk about board games specifically. How did you get into board games? What's the story?
Well, like a lot of other, resellers, one of the first tips that they tell you is scan everything, look at everything, research everything. And the more you do that, the more you start to learn what stuff is not profitable and what stuff is profitable. And so, like many others, I'd see a ton of board games at resale shops, thrift stores, garage sales. And a lot of times I'd be like, that's a mess. That is just too much to do. But then in the back of my head, there's that little, voice saying, scan everything. Just take a moment, scan it. And I started scanning stuff and started realizing there is a ton of money in board games.
Yeah, it's a massive blind spot, and I was a victim of it for the longest time, where I would like I said, I would scan the games, and I'm like, there's so much money here, but how do I know what all the pieces are? And there's all the different stuff. I was in I might have mentioned this to you, but I was in Minneapolis visiting a friend of mine he's a bookseller, and he asked me, he's like, hey man, what do you know about board games? I keep scanning these games, and they're worth money like on paper, but I don't know how to actually get them together and get everything together and get them to Amazon and actually turn it into money. And I was like, man, I don't know, but listen, if you figure that out, you should write a book. I told him, I said, you should write a book because, and he started to figure out, not quite to the extent that you did, but, and then your book came along and we didn't have to figure it out anymore. So tell me this, and I know the answer, but I just want to hear you say it. What percentage of sources that you go to would you say have profitable board games?
Yeah, I would say in my experience, 95 to 98% of thrift stores that I go into, I'm walking out with a profitable board game.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I was gonna say like 90-ish%. That's my experience as well. So, how did you? How did? Are you self-taught when it comes to board games? I mean, you kind of alluded to that, but you just had to figure this out on your own. Is that right?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, I love board games personally. So one of the first things I did, as a lot of resellers do, when you have something around the house you don't use anymore, you think, well, hey, how much can I get for this on Amazon or eBay? And so there were some board games that we had. We weren't using them anymore. The kids weren't using them anymore. So, I scanned them and I was like, this is pretty good stuff. And then I started realizing, hey, this one has all the pieces, but this one is missing pieces. So I kind of figured out where are the best places to find the missing pieces. And there's a learning curve when it comes to reselling board games, and that's why I put the book together to kind of make that learning curve a lot faster for other people that help my mistakes become your successes.
Yeah, it really helps. I noticed on Amazon, anything you're selling, to have a passion for what you're selling,
Mm-hmm.
even if it is board games. I mean, you can have a passion for board games. I personally
Right.
don't play board games like ever, but I know the other things that I sell that are kind of quirky and weird.
Mm-hmm.
I have a passion for them, like vinyl records and things. That it's because I have a passion. I know there's other people, and just it part of the equation. I think is just knowing that something can be done, which is like kind of what your book did for me. It's like just knowing that there's somebody out there doing this better than I am, it sort of helps me. Okay, at least knowing it can be done is like almost like oftentimes like 90% of it.
Right.
And a lot of people just don't even, they just think board games. I don't even, they didn't even know they can sell used board games,
Right.
on Amazon. So, what do you think? Because I consider this to be a huge blind spot, which is why I want to have you on, and why I put it in my book. What do you think is the biggest obstacle that people like? Why aren't more people doing this?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is that most people are lazy, and they want the easy find, they want the easy flip, and being able to find something that's brand new, piece of cake. But when you're finding a used or collectible board game, people are thinking it takes too much time to make sure that all the pieces are there. Takes too much time to find the missing pieces and make the complete set. But what most people don't realize is it's a really small amount of extra time, and so most people just assume it's a pain in the butt, and they look over it and pass by it. And I'm okay with that because that's more for me to find and more money for me to make.
Yeah, it's funny. The video I did earlier this week, it almost sounds like I almost like coached the person I was interviewing, because the point they made set up the intention behind this book I'm putting out on Sunday night so perfectly. And you just said something else that was just like, that's like, it's such a perfect setup where you said people are lazy. And fundamentally, like that's kind of the foundation for the book I wrote, which is like people want the cream off the top, and they don't
Mm-hmm.
realize there's this whole iceberg of inventory under the surface. And if you just
Absolutely.
put a little bit more effort into it, you can tap into that. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's such an awesome point. Um, so eBay, let's talk about eBay versus Amazon. If you had to pull a number out of the air, like what percentage of games do you sell on eBay versus Amazon? Is it all Amazon? What's the breakdown?
Well, if it's brand new, it definitely goes to Amazon. And when it comes to used or collectible board games, I'll do the research. I'll look on Camel to see how things are working with Amazon. I'll sometimes take a look at Terapeak and see how things are doing with eBay and see where I can get the most bang for my buck. Where I can get the biggest amount of profit. And but most of the time, it's Amazon. For a completed game. Every once in a while, eBay will give me a higher profit. But the thing that I love about eBay is that I'm able to sell some of the pieces of the board games on eBay, and sometimes I'm able to like buy a board game. Maybe I'm missing a few pieces. It's actually sometimes more profitable to break that board game up and sell the individual pieces to other
Wow.
people who are trying to complete their sets or
Wow.
find their missing pieces. And sometimes it's even more profitable that way because it's a small, tiny little thing. You can put a little bubble mailer, not a big deal for shipping costs and time or storage, and it's good money.
Wow. That is really cool. And like no one would ever think of that. Like if they didn't buy your book. So and it's a weird thing. One of the things that a lot of Amazon sellers miss, as much as we hype up Amazon, there's a small sliver of inventory, depending on the category, that does better on eBay. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not, there's really, in my experience, it's not much, but there is a little bit. And so oftentimes it can pay to know, to do your research. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking about like really specific board games that do better on eBay are the ones that, that where the condition is so important for whether it's a collector who is wanting to get the exact board game that he had when he was a kid, or wanting to have, because on eBay, you can have the multiple pictures, a more specific item description, and you're able to get more on eBay for that older game or rare game than you could on Amazon, where you're just kind of a blanket item on Amazon for the most part.
Interesting. That makes sense. So like an extremely hyper, um, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Like particular buyer that needs like
Right.
to know every little detail. They might actually go on eBay versus Amazon. That's
Right.
interesting. Um, so one of the things that I feel like is important when you're selling, especially kind of the weirder stuff that we're talking about, is to know the motives of the buyer, and that
Mhm.
allows you to sort of um, spot new kinds of inventory, and also
Mhm.
within that category, figure out, whether it's like cassette tape, all the kind of weird stuff we're talking about. It helps to know why people buy.
Right.
So put us in the head of a board game buyer. Who are these people? Why are they buying used board games?
Well, like with almost anything, there's so many different types of people who will buy board games for different reasons. There's the guy who, like I said a moment ago, wants to buy the exact same game he played when he was a kid, and he wants to have that exact game from that exact year to play with his own kids. There's the collectors who are wanting to buy every single game version of a particular theme or TV show or something. Someone wants to buy every single Seinfeld game that's out there. They want Seinfeld Clue and Seinfeld Trivial Pursuit and Seinfeld Seen It and all the, they're trying to collect those. And then there's the people who just have a passion for antique board games, and that, there's so many different reasons and passions that people have for why they want to buy these board games, that it just makes it such a profitable niche to look into. And so anytime I'm out sourcing board games, if I see something that is a very specific theme, I'll scan it. If I see a board game that's I've never heard of or seen of before, I'm definitely looking into that, because the rarer the better for some
Yeah,
people.
yeah. It's interesting you mentioned people who grow up and are trying to kind of reclaim their youth by buying stuff that they had. It's a real simple rule of thumb is if you just look back 20, 25, 30 years from the present and what was huge back then, if you're trying
Mm-hmm.
to think about what's a weird oddball thing I can sell on Amazon, like people, they grow up, they get a little bit of money and they start to buy all that stuff. I mean, I do that. I've got a whole record
Right,
collection here of stuff that I listened to in high
right.
school that I'm buying again. Um, that's a good point that you made. So let's talk about why you wrote the book. I wrote the book that I'm about to put out because I was constantly getting feedback from Amazon sellers, either through my inbox or meeting people out in the field
Mm-hmm.
or on internet forums and so forth. Everyone was telling me that won't work, that won't work. Whatever that is, whether I
Right.
was talking, whatever sort of anything that strays just slightly off the most well-worn path. People freak out and tell you it'll never work. They tell you don't even try it. They're so experienced, and I'll take my
Mm-hmm.
word for it. I'm old school. I know, and it's like turns out they're almost always wrong. And
Right.
it's good that they don't know this stuff works because it's more money for us. But so that's why I wrote Blind Spot Profits, is like to plug people in to all the stuff that other sellers tell you won't work that
Mm-hmm.
actually will sell. So why did you write the Reseller's Guide to Board Games?
Well, I first just wrote it out just because I loved board games. I loved buying them and selling them. And, it first started off as just like a little blog post. I was writing for my full-time FBA.com blog, and I thought about, I'm just going to write this blog post about board games. And I was like, man, there's just so much. And I kept writing, and I kept thinking, well, this is going to turn into like a series, like maybe part 1 of 4 or something. And then that turned in, it ended up being a book, because I realized I have so much knowledge about this. And there's so many people out there on Facebook, on email forums, where it comes to reselling. People kept asking questions, and I kept answering them. And so I decided, you know what, this needs to be a book. There needs to be a resource out there to help people, uh, make turn what my mistakes were into their successes, and be able to just meet a need that's out there, because everyone's looking for what's the next new thing I can learn to increase my profits? What's the next new thing I can learn to be able to have more inventory? And something that is almost every single thrift store, garage sale, resale shop, there are board games. And, I needed something that was something very profitable and something that was everywhere. And board games was it. And so when I started looking into, writing all this stuff down in the book, I started realizing that, man, there's just so much good information out there for people. I was starting to get a little afraid. Am I starting to, give away the deed to the house? Am I giving away all the secrets and stuff? But after the book came out, I'm still able to find just as much inventory. In fact, I'll probably find even more just because I was so engrossed in it for so long.
Mm. It's interesting you mentioned it started out as a blog post, because I heard something recently that you know 10 times more about any given subject than you think you do. In other words, when you sit down to put it on paper, it turns out if you think you have a blog post, you probably have a book. And then you know 10 times more than you think you do, and you know 100 times more than your audience. And so it's easy to forget that. But I heard that recently. I just thought of that when you were talking.
It makes sense.
So let's just end on your biggest score. Give us like your all-time biggest board game score.
Yeah, for a while it was this board game called Space Hulk, which I bought for a couple bucks and sold for 200. But recently it was eclipsed by the original Axis and Allies board game. I can't remember the exact year it was, but it was one of the first ones that came out. And I bought it for, I think, $5 or $10. I spent about $20 on replacement pieces because there was some stuff that was missing, and sent it in, and it sold about a month later for just under $400.
Wow.
It was, I had so much fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, what a great note to end on. So anyway, thanks, Stephen. Check out Stephen's blog, buy his book. Like I said, I've got a chapter in Blind Spot Profits coming out Sunday that talks about board games. But if you really want to get your hands dirty and get into it, you got to get Stephen's book. And the good thing about Stephen's book is you can buy it now. By the time you watch this, my book's probably not out yet. So awesome, Stephen. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. And I think it's going to help a lot of people. Thanks.